Hey, I'm Pastor Shane. Welcome back to another episode of Family Foundations. You know, the goal of all this is to try to give you as parents another tool to help you further equip and disciple your kids. Today, we want to talk about the danger of being a perfectionist parent and how it may lead to our kids experiencing shame. Over the years, I've had numerous conversations with guys who are the children of parents that are in ministry. Often I'd hear them talk about their home life. Maybe they felt lots of pressure, always having to be good, always having to perform. They didn't want to reflect badly on their parents or on their ministry. Sometimes this was pressure that was put directly on the kid, maybe from their parents, maybe from the church, maybe it was just assumed. But many kids of parents in ministry often feel like they need to be perfect. I don't think this is true only for ministry kids. A recent study out of the University of Singapore shows some troubling trends. In this study, 60% of kids aged 8 to 12 all showed high levels of self-criticalness, while 78% self-described themselves as perfectionists. It's important to note there is a difference between perfectionism and having high standards. As Dr. Paul Hewitt from the University of British Columbia outlines the difference, he says this: perfectionism is when people expect perfection of themselves or others and are mercilessly hard on themselves when they don't attain it. So the other day, my 7-year-old Jack, who is starting to read and write, he wrote this on some paper and he wanted us to put it up on the fridge. Now, what is noticeable is that nothing is actually spelled right. But isn't this just an incredible thing for a 7-year-old to know and seek to actually articulate? But as I read this, I caught myself dwelling on the spelling mistakes, thinking to myself, Jack needs to be better, that he needs to fix these mistakes. I think all of us as parents on some level or another have a perfectionist bone in our body, especially when we think about our kids. We want them to succeed. We want what's best for them. But have we actually stopped to think about the effects of demanding perfection from our kids? Dr. Hewitt, again from the University of British Columbia, who has done extensive studies on the effects of perfectionism in the home, he reports that children whose parents are perfectionists are at a higher risk for clinical depression, eating disorders, and suicide. You see, when a child meets expectations, they usually receive praise, which secures in their minds that their value is tied directly to them doing good or being successful. But what actually happens when they fail? What happens when they don't meet the standard that either you as a parent or a teacher, a coach, or maybe even themselves that they put on them? Well, they actually experience shame. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. Now, if we think back to the note that my son Jack wrote for a second, I imagine that Jack would have experienced a lot of shame had I went to him with his note, pointed out all the spelling errors, told him that this note was in need of fixing, that he needed to be better, or tell him that he can't draw or write anything unless he were to actually do it right. It would actually crush him. I could see Jack basing his value off of his work. He would feel like a failure. He would feel like he could not measure up to my standard. He would feel like I don't love and accept him for who he is. That is what shame does. Christian psychologist Dr. Dan Allender, he says that the most common way of dealing with shame is contempt, either for ourselves or for others. See, when we hold ourselves in contempt, what we are really saying is that we are worthless. So there's great danger in perfectionism, as the shame that comes from being unable to achieve the standards set really discredit who you and your kids really are. And that is image bearers of God. So parents, there is a great onus that is put on us. Dr. Brené Brown, she describes that the majority of childhood shame is fostered in the home, meaning what happens under your roof is very important to your kid's development. Psychologist Dr. David Stein, he says that parents who cannot tolerate their own imperfections often cannot tolerate their kids either. So what can we as parents do? Well, we all as parents first need to look in the mirror and deal with our own imperfections, because the personal shame we carry will be burdened onto our kids. If we can't be honest about our own stories of shame, then we will wrongly create expectations for our kids to try to achieve what we actually failed to do ourselves. And then the cycle of dysfunction will just perpetuate for generations. But we also need to have a proper view of God, His love, and His never-ending grace towards us. Never forget that God's love towards us is unconditional, meaning that no matter our faults or successes, God will never stop loving us. Remember that our identity is that of a loved child of God, meaning that our failures don't need to define who we are at all, as God knows us only as His child. Keep at the forefront of your mind that God seeks to lavish His love and favor on you, meaning that He is for us and seeks to do good for us. We must fully understand and believe that God gives us grace upon grace upon grace, meaning that no matter how much we fail or how much we miss the mark, He gives us a second, third, fourth, right through till infinity. This is how many chances He gives us to work at being better and to love Him more. See, this is how God sees us. And it's only when we as parents see, believe, and live out of this incredible love and grace that God has for us that we can actually, in turn, give this to our kids. We know our kids are going to mess up, that they're going to spell God with a B instead of a D. But extending love and grace is not about demanding perfection. It's actually about encouraging authenticity. And that's where we will see our kids freely learning, growing, and living life as deeply loved and accepted children. As always, here are a few questions for you to ponder. If you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, feel free to send me an email. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.